My name is Paul Maassen, as Julia mentioned. I want to thank her for inviting me here today. It's great to be here amongst esteemed colleagues of the Fourth Estate. So it's really good to see everybody, and good to see. I'm not sure. I guess I'll go here. You know, it's radio, so I really should know how to work a microphone, right? So I am manager of WRKF, the NPR station here in Baton Rouge, and also WWNO, which is the NPR station in New Orleans. And for some reason, we've been making news these days. I'm not sure, but we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, yes, let me clear up, not clear up, but expound on what Julia mentioned, which is, yes, I'm actually a simple man from New Jersey, but I did live in Baton Rouge as a kid for about 6 or 7 years. I went to St. Thomas More. I lived over in Sherwood Forest, and then went to Sherwood Forest Junior High School for a while. So I do have very fond recollections of being in Baton Rouge and being here. And so it's, I can't say back. I can say back. It's been a number of years that I've been back in the area, and it's great to be here. Well, this is a pivotal moment in public broadcasting, and I just wanted to take a minute to kind of talk a little bit about it. I was going to talk about CPB, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, what it is, why it's important, what's the impact here locally and also for stations across the country, and then also take your questions as well. So, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and in public radio, we love acronyms. Most businesses do, but I think we have a special a love for them. So that's CPB. You'll hear that in the news. It was actually part of the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967. It was established, CPB, as a private, nonprofit corporation funded by an appropriation from Congress. And their goal was to ensure access of non-commercial, high-quality content through broadcast and digital platforms across the country. Now remember, 1967, we have 3 TV networks, right? And media is rather concentrated at that point. And its mission, CPB's mission at that time, was to ensure universal access to content and services that educate, inform, foster curiosity, and promote civil discourse essential to American society. Civil discourse. I want you to remember that, because I think that's an important piece of what public media does these days. CPB is, or should I say was, the single largest source of funding for public broadcasting. This includes radio and television across the country. It funds 1,500 public radio and TV stations across the country. Its total budget is $535 million. That was the appropriation from Congress for 15,000 stations across the country, to disperse it to those particular stations. Radio received, and I'm giving you all these numbers because I know, I've sat on the other side of these kind of situations, being part of the press, and it's a little different being on this side with this particular group. And I know numbers are kind of important, so I want to kind of give you some basic numbers for background and context. So, of that $535 million, radio across the country received $120 million of that. Television, we're talking about public television, received $363 million of that for their operations, and $32 million of that is system support. And that's an important number also to remember, the system support. Basically, the breakout between television and radio was about 66% of the funding went to public television and about 20% went to public radio. CPB does not produce programs or own any stations. NPR does not own any stations either. They're just, NPR, National Public Radio, is just a program provider. PBS doesn't own any stations either. They're a program producer and also a program distributor of content. So that's kind of a quick overview of what CPB was established for and the kind of numbers that we were talking about. Here in Louisiana, CPB funding funds 9 radio stations, 3 here in Baton Rouge, WRKF, KLSU, and WRBH as well. And it's a portion of the funding of those stations. Each station is different. There are 8 TV stations that are funded here in Louisiana. There's 3 entities though. It's LPB, WYES in New Orleans, and WLAE in New Orleans are also the stations that receive CPB funding. I need to point this out, it's kind of important because people sometimes confuse this, and I totally understand why they do. WRKF is not part of LPB, Louisiana Public Broadcasting. WRKF is a completely independent organization. It's a nonprofit organization, has its own 501c3 status. The board for that group is made up of community leaders here that their sole job is to operate the station and make it better and do more for the community every single day. It was about 45 years ago that Baton Rouge was one of the largest metropolitan areas in the country that did not have a public radio station. And a group of individuals got together, community leaders, and said, we want to change that. We want to do something about it. They got together. They raised money, did the footwork to get WRKF started. And so WRKF has been founded as an independent, nonprofit, public radio broadcaster since its inception. And that carries on today. As a matter of fact, WRKF will be, as we mentioned, 45 years on the air doing that. And now with the elimination of CPB funding, which made up about 8% to 9% of its budget, is now completely independently funded through a combination of individual giving, our membership drives, which I know everybody, those of you who listen, love the membership drives, but they're incredibly important. And what I tell people is it's kind of like our galas every year. That's what our membership drives are. So that's about 40% of our funding. Underwriting from local businesses on the air makes up about 30%. And then we've got 30% of our funding comes from various grants from foundations and things like that. CPB was part of that 30%, along with some other foundations. What you don't hear in that mix is state funding. WRKF receives no direct state funding from the state of Louisiana, nor do any of the other public radio stations in the state. And so WRKF is truly independently funded now, and that's what having CPB funding withdrawn sort of underlines that even more. I think it's important to point out that 99% of Americans have access to public broadcasting right now, be they here in this state or across the country. We're talking about metropolitan areas and then also rural areas as well. And often in rural areas, public broadcasting, especially on the radio side, is the only local broadcasting entity that they have access to. And part of that is because of those areas, there just isn't the business or philanthropic base to keep those things going. That's why the commercial stations are not found in those areas. They tend to be found in the, in the metropolitan areas and those kind of things. And so they play an incredible role in those communities of providing news information, cultural programming, local programming, community-based programming, all those kind of things. Unfortunately, with CPB funding now being pulled, those stations are the ones that are most at risk in this process because their percentage of what their budget is made by CPB funding is much higher. Like I mentioned, WRKF is about 8 or 9%. Many of those stations, especially in the rural areas, it can be as much as 30, 40, or 50% of their budget. And if you're looking at those kind of numbers, it now becomes an existential situation when that funding gets pulled. So with all that's going on with the, you've heard rescission, that was what happened recently with CPB funding being rescinded. That was money that was already appropriated by Congress for the next 2 years for public broadcasting. That has been taken away now, and we don't, at this point, expect, we have to plan on not seeing any more money from the federal government to operate this year, next year, and into the future. So that's kind of how we're strategizing everything right now. Excuse me, as I mentioned, WRKF is a public broadcasting station. And real quickly, back in the early days of FM, WRKF is 89.3 FM on your radio dial, so make sure you tune that in. Dial, does anybody have a dial anymore? I don't know. Back when FM was new, the FCC decided they were going to carve out something called educational broadcast licenses. And they took anything below 92 on the dial, I'm going to say dial, I'm going to keep saying that, was to be a non-commercial educational license. And so to this day, you find most of your public broadcasting stations on the lower end of the dial, so to speak, between 88.1 and 92 to this day. That's where you'll find most of them. That includes also, by the way, public broadcasting is not just news and information, it's cultural programming, it's music programming, it's a whole variety of different topics and different programming that you find, but it all has the basis of being non-commercial. And so down there you're going to find, down there in the lower end of the dial, you'll find those stations. Also included as non-commercial educational licenses are the religious broadcasters as well. So you tend to find religious broadcasters, public radio stations, and other community-based stations down at that end of the dial. And so it's kind of interesting that that's how it all worked out from the FCC point of view. One thing that we do and we feel is very, very, very important is to provide this content for free on all our platforms. That includes broadcast, that includes digital and online, podcasts, everything, whatever we do. And so that federal support helped us to be able to do that. As a nonprofit organization, and if you are involved in a nonprofit at all, you know how difficult it is to raise money, how challenging it is. Especially general support money, and that's what that CPB money was. While it was only 8 or 9% of our budget, incredibly important because you're able to leverage that into all kinds of other things. And general support is some of the hardest kind of money to get for a nonprofit organization. And so we find ourselves in a situation where we have to now replace that money because we want to continue to provide, free access to our content with no paywalls, locally owned and operated, and community-based programming. And we find that to be very, very important and something that is also vanishing from media these days. And so we also provide, and another piece that CPB helped with was emergency alerting, emergency broadcasting during times of natural disasters or those kind of situations. And what's really interesting is that, and you all have lived through this, I've lived through this, we've all done this together. What happens when a hurricane comes through? The power goes out, right? And the power can go out for long stretches of time. And when that happens, the communication infrastructure starts to break down. It starts with your cell phone doesn't work, right? I'm talking about multiple days of no power. And look, I'm guilty of it too. When my cell phone doesn't work, man, I panic. I don't know what's going on. It's incredible how dependent we've become to those. Then the next thing is the internet goes. And then you have no power at your house. It's very difficult to watch television. Radio becomes the backup to the backup in delivering what I would call life-saving information to the community and that they have access to. During times of emergency, we're putting on press conferences from all around the region, conveying information, doing all that kind of thing. That's part of what CPB helped us to be able to do as public broadcasters. And so that's something that we find is very important, and I am really concerned about how this is going to affect stations across the country and communities across the country that aren't going to be able to maintain this. And so that is kind of everything in sort of a nutshell. You know, it's interesting because other countries do believe public broadcasting is incredibly important. We're talking about England, the BBC, which is funded through public funding. France, Japan, Australia, Italy, Germany, Canada, you name it, they all find it very important to support public broadcasting with federal support. The U.S. is now saying, nope, we're not going to do that anymore. And so now the burden of raising that money and continuing this incredible community resource is on us and our listeners in the community. It's an independent model, and we are ready to move forward on that. We've got a lot of really great response thus far, but this is uncharted territory, and this is new territory for us. And we hope our listeners will come along with us on it. I believe they will, but we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and help to make this happen and create a better service for this community and for the rest of the country with independent funding. So, will you join us? Well, a couple of things I just wanted to mention was, first of all, we'll take some questions momentarily, well, why don't we do that right now, I would say. I'll end on that. Won't you join us? Okay, questions. Yes, please.
So one of the reasons for the cuts was allegedly that the programming was biased and too left-leaning. And I keep telling all of my friends and guests, Jim Inkster's very fair and very balanced, and he's not left-leaning. But he's on, they say, but he's on this station that is very left-leaning and unbiased. How do you address that?
Yeah. Well, I think you made an important point. If we were biased, would we have Governor Jeff Landry on a regular basis? Would we have different viewpoints on the air on a regular basis? Would we have a program called Left, Right, and Center on the air, which basically articulates each of these positions? Remember I mentioned that civil discourse point? Has all those positions articulated by individuals who know what they're talking about. And it's not like somebody's trying to win the conversation. It's called having a conversation and talking about those different things. I think during the course of a day, we provide a huge amount of content, from news and information to cultural content, music, food, arts, literature, you name it. It's all comes in this package called WRKF every day. And there are different viewpoints that get expressed when you do that. And I don't expect everyone who listens to us to agree with everything we say, everything we report on, or those kind of things. That's, I think it's impossible for that to happen when you're providing multiple viewpoints. And right now, unfortunately, in media, I think there is a focus, for better or worse, on what we call in the business super serving your audience, which is you figure out who your audience is and then you super serve them. If they like this viewpoint, bam, give them that viewpoint. If they like this viewpoint, give them that, whatever it is. They like sports, give them a lot of sports. You know, it's whatever works. We kind of take a viewpoint that, you know, it's important to hear the entire discussion, the entire spectrum of what's out there. And you make the determination about what you feel is the information you need to make the kind of decisions you need to make. And so I think it's a function of the fact that we provide so many different viewpoints that, sure, you could cherry pick some of them and say you're this way or that way, but take it as a whole. Take the thing as an entire presentation, and then I don't think you'll come up with the same conclusion. Also, there's a difference between what happens nationally and what happens locally. You know, we do not have necessarily editorial control over what's going on at NPR, or for that matter, the BBC, you know, nor should we have control over that. Locally, we do take great pride in bringing different people on the air. Jim's show, which by the way is on at 9 in the morning, at 9 at night, tune in, also available as a podcast. I'll tell you what, I get calls from Jim's show, well I get calls anyway, but, but really, you know, sometimes some people will agree with the guests, and sometimes they won't. And to Jim's credit, he brings on different people of different viewpoints on that air. That's not easy to do. Not in today's media environment. That is not an easy thing to do. Not if your goal is to provide a civil conversation about the topic. You can bring somebody on just to stir things up and all that kind of thing. But that's not what we're trying to do. And so I would say that, you know, because of the variety of content and viewpoints that you hear, you could, sometimes people hear what they want to hear sometimes. And also, I don't necessarily accept that as I'm not saying you're saying it, I'm just saying I don't accept that as a de facto statement. I do think there's also, in today's society, if you say it enough, you keep saying it, and you keep saying it, well, people think it's fact, and that's not always the case. Thank you. Yes.
Last week I was traveling across Louisiana west, and of course I lost your station at some point.
Don't tell me that.
And so I tuned in to the Lafayette station and was totally not aware of the extensive cultural options, especially later in the afternoon, and the music, of course, and some of the educational points. But I wondered, it gave me a thought that perhaps there were other ways that you all could seek money specifically for the cultural arts aspects. Is there anything that keeps you from applying for grants? That's my question, really.
For cultural programming?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, nothing stops us from doing that. We do that pretty much every day. We're looking on the hunt for those kind of things. And we do feel that the cultural component is incredibly important to the presentation, especially here, South Louisiana. Come on, we need to talk about the local culture that we have here, and we do that. And to your point, and I'm supposed to repeat the question. I forgot. Okay, so the question was, we have. It's not. I'm going to paraphrase. It's not just news and information that we're talking about. There's a lot of other things that happen on public broadcasting. What are we doing here at WRKF to specifically address that? And what about the rest of the country? And is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. So I would say that yes, we feel the cultural piece is incredibly important, and we want to do more and more of that. As a matter of fact, we're talking with the other public radio stations right now about, because there's some really good programs out there. And some of them we produce, and some of them other people produce. Why can't we get that all together and kind of create a unified presentation a little more, or at least borrow from each other and do those kind of things? We already kind of do it, and maybe this will have us do more of that kind of thing. And I would also say this, if you've heard one public radio station, you've heard one public radio station, because they're all different flavors of different things. You know, WRKF, I don't know if you know this, but we have a full 24-hour classical program on our HD2 channel. You've heard that. There you go. That's, we made a commitment to that. Said this is important, something that's not in the market, something not available to folks, so let's put that up there and make that available. That's no small task, but we think that's important to have. We concentrate on news and information and those kind of things on the main signal, but we need to have other outlets to do that. And then we also pull programming to do as what we call interstitials in our news and information programming. That's cultural in nature and other kind of things. Again, to provide that sort of cornucopia of content that comes out of public radio. That's also an unusual business model. You don't really hear that on commercial stations by and large, simply because they are working on a format, and there's nothing wrong with it, but they're working on a format to super serve that audience and gain as much of that audience as they can for advertising purposes. And so we have the ability to stretch a little bit more and do these kind of things and provide contextual pieces, longer form journalism, all this kind of thing. This is what public broadcasting does on radio and on television too. That's incredibly important, and it really would be a loss for that to go away because we haven't placed a value on it as a society. So I'm hoping that won't happen, but yes. Yeah, thank you.
So I have like a two-part question about raising money. I guess the first part is, I like to think I'm not that old, but even in the last 20 years, there's just a lot more nonprofit news in the space. I work for a nonprofit news outlet and work a lot with WRKF and WWNO. But just in Louisiana, we have the Lens, Verite, all the public radio stations,
right.
All the public television stations, us, the Louisiana Illuminator, and the Current in Lafayette. And I may be missing someone in there, but those are like the kind of the nonprofit news outlets. I would say a lot of those did not exist even 5 years ago, right? And so I guess the first part of my question is, and that's to say nothing of ProPublica,
the national, or a regional, right?
Tribune. To your point, sir, there are some conservative-leaning nonprofit news outlets too that cover national politics, and our local newspaper also applies for a lot of grants and gets a lot of nonprofit funding. So I guess could you talk about how fundraising has changed now that we've got all these people in the space? And do you have? When I hear there's $500 million coming out of nonprofit news across the country, that concerns me quite a bit because I don't know what the capacity is for all these various
right.
outlets. And then the second part of the question is to be blunt. I have a 21-year-old stepchild who didn't even know that public radio was actually on the radio. Seriously, 2 years ago was what do you mean it's a radio station? They were just consuming the podcasts and
right.
and so at least when I worked at a public radio station very briefly, it seemed like a lot of our fundraising was geared towards people who were listening to public radio in their car, going to work and home from work, and I'm wondering how that's shifted to now that people might be listening to it differently or just have different options.
All right, 2 questions. First one is there's a growing presence of nonprofit news organizations here in Louisiana, but also across the country. How does that ecosystem work? And then number 2 is radio as a platform. Does it have a future? I'll say it that way. Okay, so those are 2 good questions. Number 1, all those organizations you mentioned, we're talking about Verite, the Lens, the Illuminator, Current, and others. We work with all of those right now. And I think, and we like working with Julia and everybody. It's really good. And I think there is something to that. There's something there, and something that we're trying to develop and create some kind of, business school. Synergy, yeah, all right, I said it. I said the S word, synergy, to try to make, more from less. And I think there is a possibility to do that. And we're going to try to pursue that. Again, though, it's hard enough to keep the operation going, I'm talking about WRKF, and then to have, what little federal funding we were getting to get that pulled. And by the way, it isn't over time. It's not like, okay, in 2 years your funding will get pulled and you have a glide path. It's like, no, it's right now. Boom, money that was already appropriated, already in the budgets and all those kind of things. So it just makes it harder to do those kind of things. But we'll figure it out. We're gonna figure this out, because there is something to that, and putting that all together. And I must say, I'm incredibly encouraged from the response from this community, also from in New Orleans as well. We've got some great response to this, and that, I think, tells us the importance that people do place on this, which is great. And so we're very encouraged by that and feel that we can chart this new course. We'll see. It's not going to be easy, and we'll see what happens, but everybody is invested in this process at this point. Number 2, so radio, broadcast in general is tough these days. I'm talking about not only radio, but TV broadcast, linear schedules, all this kind of stuff. Things are changing pretty rapidly. And so I think we actually have a model that can work, and I'll tell you why. Everybody has their different platform. We call them platforms that they like. There's broadcast platform, there's digital platform, there's podcast, there's all these kind of things. NPR is one of the top podcasters in the world right now. WWNO, WRKF have put out some extremely successful podcasts recently on all kinds of topics. And so we are and I tell my staff this, and they laugh. Well, they laugh in general, but they really laugh at this one when I say, we're a multimedia organization, and we are. Our digital and online listening and podcast audiences are growing as well, but the broadcast audience is still substantial, and will be substantial for the foreseeable future. It won't grow. It might not grow like we want it to, but we can provide content where people are. And that's our challenge right now, is to figure out how to make that really sing. Meaning, how do we get into these digital spaces? Not at the expense of the broadcast, but we have the ability to put these all together. There's a reason why NPR is one of the top podcasters. And that reason is they have this station platform across the country to introduce these programs to people, and then they get kind of going onto the podcast end of it. And so the podcasts take off. But right now the podcast space is so crowded, and there's so many different things going on there. How do you get noticed? How do you get yours to rise above the background static? The station, the broadcast platform. These two together are incredibly powerful. And not everybody can do it, because not everybody has a broadcast station, right? Not everybody has the cooperation of stations all across the country to do that. So I think we're in a unique position to take advantage of that and move forward a little more. We got to do it. That's the problem, right? I can talk about it all I want, but we got to actually put it into action to make that work. But I think we have the tools to do that.
Are we going to be losing any of these national programs that we put in your station?
I think it's inevitable that some of the national programs will have to go away. I shouldn't say have to go away. The economic reality is they're not going to be able to maintain them. And how many, I don't know. It all depends on how stations are able to raise money and those kind of things. Because it's just an economic question. It costs X to make a program. By the way, NPR, and this is another thing that people don't realize, we pay NPR licensing fees for the programs. There's people who think that they give us the programs for free or pay us for the programs. I would love that, but that's not happening. We have to pay. We feel they're quality programs. You have to pay for them. There's a lot that goes on, and so that's part of the revenue model. And if the stations don't have the kind of money that they used to have to be able to pay for the programs, they can't pay what they used to pay. And so there's kind of an economic nick point that you reach where that program can no longer continue to function because it's just not bringing in enough money to pay the production fees. One thing that's interesting about public broadcasting is it's a nonprofit model, which means there isn't an individual who's, making profit on the program. The way I describe it, it's a little different between commercial broadcasting and public broadcasting. And I've worked in commercial broadcasting for years and years, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's great, and I'm not saying anything negative about it. They're just different animals, and that is that commercial stations, they put on programs to make money through advertising. Perfectly fine, nothing wrong with that. Public radio kind of inverts that model a little bit. We get money to put on programs. It's a little different metric for success, and no individual is building up equity in these public broadcasting because they're nonprofit corporations, and so it's just a different model. That's all.
The funding model, with the significant chunk of change that you get from individuals and things like that, since the rescission, has the number of either contributors gone up or are people sending you more money? What's been the immediate reaction to all of this?
Since the rescission, have we seen an uptick in donations from individuals and things like that? The answer is yes, we have. That's what I mentioned. That's the encouraging part of this, is we weren't sure what was going to happen. And we have seen an uptick here locally, and I'm talking with my colleagues across the country. They're also seeing an uptick in that. The question is, okay, right now it's top of mind. People are thinking about it. They're energized to act, those kind of things. But remember, this rescission and the money we were getting from CPB was an annual grant that we got from CPB. It's called the Community Service Grant. And so for WRKF, it's $150,000 this year, but it's also $150,000 next year, and the next year, and the next year, that we won't be seeing, that we felt like was fairly consistent money that we'd be seeing. And so while the outpouring of donations right now is, first of all, we're incredibly honored and humbled that people are doing that, and very thankful. We have to look at it as the short game and the long game. And the long game is how are we going to keep that momentum going and continue to add to have money to be able to continue like we were before. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about the long game. I'm hearing that I'm not hearing that you or other public radio leaders are thinking about this as an existential threat.
Are we thinking about this as an existential threat, as a system? Is that?
Just like in terms of the prospects of public radio existing long into the future.
I don't know if it's existential as a system, but it is in that the model and how we operate will change. It has to change, especially when I talk about those rural stations and those kind of things. And the question is, what will we be able to retain, and what are we going to have to change moving forward, or do without moving forward, depending on what we have. So I think you got to think of the public radio system, even though the stations are, it's interesting. You ever heard the term herding cats? Well, that's what a public radio meeting is when we get all the stations together. Because each station is individually is individually cemented to their community, because that's the way they are. The nonprofit corporations are all in that community. WRKF is a perfect example of that. they don't report to NPR, they don't report to CPB. They are their own entity and do their own thing, make their own decisions, raise their own money for their local projects and things like that. And so it's not like there's a corporate top-down kind of model like you might see for other organizations where somebody can make a decision here and then whoosh, everybody does it. We're a little bit more consensus model driven, I guess you might say, on that kind of deal. The question is, this ecosystem across the country, you know, these 386 different radio entities that have 700 radio stations attached to them. I'm talking about radio. They may, like I said, they're all sort of have their own way that they operate, but have worked together on that level. Now that that system is going to be strained, I'm concerned that that cooperation will either flourish or it won't. And so that, in that sense, there is an existential crisis about what's going to happen to this cooperative model and the way these stations work together and do things. I am very hopeful that it's going to encourage stations to work together. And my question, though, is are they going to have the resources to actually be able to get to that point? That'll be the situation. Yes, sir.
I'm sort of afraid to show my ignorance on this, but what's the main reason none of the other local TV stations are here today?
The public TV stations?
I got a text, somebody wants to go to here all the time, and says, I guess it's not a big turnout. But it is a big turnout, but it's, I'm a little, why wouldn't they not, y'all fishing competition, or why are they not here reporting on this?
Talking about the public TV, LPB, for example, or something. Is that what you're saying? Oh, the commercial. Oh, other stations. Oh, the commercial stations. I can't speak for them. I don't know. You know what they. I will say this. I have done interviews on pretty much all of the stations, the local stations, TV stations in New Orleans, definitely, and some in Baton Rouge as well. So there is interest in it. We are seeing that. I don't think it's a competition thing. I don't think that's. You're asking why the commercial television stations aren't here covering this particular meeting. I guess I'm just not that popular. I think that's what it is. You know?
I've seen worse turnout.
Thank you. All right. Well, good. I did okay on that. I think it's a news story in that this is a community resource that's being threatened, and that's a story. And I will say that I have talked to many of the other press about this, and they've done stories on it. The Advocate has done stories on it. So we are getting. I would say we are getting interest on it. So that would be my answer. Yeah.
Okay. The fundraising.
Yes.
You apparently have this $150,000 hole right in the budget. I know y'all did the fundraising drives, and you got the founders coming up, luncheon. Anything on top of that that you can do?
So
I guess get people to join.
yeah. So how are we going to plug this hole? How are we going to, how are we going to replace CPB money? So a couple of ways to do that. Number one is obviously to appeal to our listeners and content users on the different platforms and ask for them to make donations. It's not like Netflix. I always say this. Our people who listen or use the platforms, what percentage of them actually donate? On a good day, it's 10%. Yeah, that's pretty standard for public broadcasting. Netflix, it's 100% because you don't get to use it if you don't pay for it. I don't know, you could say we're just not that smart. We actually say, no, if you don't pay for it, you can still use it because we think it's important and we think that the community will support it. And so we're going to test that model now to see if it actually comes to fruition. And I would say this, that the power of somebody making a donation to public radio or public television when they don't have to says a lot about that person. It says a lot about that community that they will do that. And so we're going to ask our donors, if they can help, and other listeners and other online users, see if we can up that percentage a little bit. If we get that 10 to 15 to 20% of people donating, that's a big deal. And the other thing is events. The Founders Luncheon, I'm glad you mentioned that. The Founders Luncheon will be September 26th at the Crown Plaza, and our guest will be Mary Louise Kelly, who is the host of All Things Considered nationally, and she's incredible, and that's going to be a fundraiser for us, and so we do that. And you can find out more at WRKF.org if you want to check that out. But do more events, connect more with the community, do more of those kind of things. Also, there are other foundations and things out there that are not federal and those kind of things, so we're really going to try to work those angles as much as possible. We already do, but we're going to have to up our game in that area. But again, I think the important thing is that we are now an independently funded organization, which means we're going to move forward in that manner. I believe, I'm a big believer in one door closes, another one opens up. So we're going to take that and embrace that and go. And so far, we've seen some really nice response to that. The challenge is to keep that going and make that work. And I hope people will, in this community and other communities across the country, will come along for that ride with public broadcasting. And I think that's all we got time for. Thank you very much.
I do want to say one more thing to people. I talked to CC Copeland, who is leading Louisiana Public Broadcasting, and he couldn't come today, but I'm hoping we can have him in the future. They seem to be facing, and I think they might have a bigger budget, a much bigger hole. I believe he told me it's over $2 million. So just so people in this community know, LPB is also facing a financial challenge.